The stable door was already shut when Eli Mercer stepped inside, and for one heavy heartbeat, it felt as though he had closed it himself. A young woman sat in the straw, with her knees drawn tight against her chest, wearing a torn, dirt-stained shirt that barely reached her thighs. Sunlight slipped through the cracks in the boards and stretched across her bare legs, revealing bruises and fading shades of yellow and purple. She flinched when his shadow crossed her, as if expecting the next strike to come from him. Eli removed his hat slowly. He noticed the outer latch first, fastened from outside. Then the iron ring bolted into the wall. A short chain lay coiled in the straw. Marks circled her wrists. She tried to speak, swallowed hard, then forced the words out in a cracked whisper. "My father?" 3 times a day. Her eyes flicked toward a wooden post beside her. 3 shallow knife cuts, carved clean and even. Morning, midday, night. "I don't cry," she said quietly. He drinks, then he locks the door. The heat inside the stable felt thick enough to choke on. Something shifted in Eli's chest that had little to do with anger and everything to do with shame. He had known Silas Whitfield for years. A middling horse trader who spent too many evenings at the Long Branch Saloon in Dodge City. Silas had told folks his daughter was fragile, troubled. Town gossip said his debts were stacking high, and land with a girl's name on it could make them disappear. What Eli saw wasn't sickness. It was control. Her name was Clara Whitfield, 18, old enough to know her own thoughts. But in Fort County, a daughter still stood beneath her father's shadow. She watched Eli the way a trapped animal watches a man holding rope, waiting to see which end he favored. Boots crunched outside on gravel. Silas returning from the well. If Eli walked away, 3 more marks would be carved before nightfall. If he stayed, he stepped into a fight the law might not see his way. Silas stopped short when he spotted Eli near the door. He set his bucket down slowly and forced a smile that never reached his eyes. "She gets dramatic in the heat," he said, wild streak in her. Eli stepped just enough to block the stall from view. Not aggressive, just firm. "She's locked in." Silas shrugged. "She runs. I keep her close. That's raising a child." "I came for the bay gelding," Eli said calmly. "I'll take him, and I'll hire her to help drive stock back to my ranch. Fair pay. She ain't for hire. She ain't livestock either." That snapped something loose. Silas lunged without warning, whiskey on his breath. The first punch clipped Eli's shoulder. The second never landed. Eli caught him by the shirt and drove him back into the stable wall. Dust burst into the air. A horse kicked in its stall. Silas swung wild. Eli kept steady. One hard blow to the ribs. One shove that sent Silas crashing into a feed barrel. Clara moved. She grabbed a fistful of straw and flung it into her father's face. Not brave. Desperate. Enough. Eli snatched the outer latch key from its nail and unlocked the stall. Then he stepped between father and daughter. "If I hear you touched her again," Eli said low, "I'll return with the law." Minutes later, his wagon rolled away from the Whitfield place. Clara sat beside him, wrapped in canvas, staring forward. Behind them, Silas watched, already thinking beyond fist of war paper and law. They left the Whitfield place in a trail of slow-rolling dust. The wagon wheels groaning against the ruts baked hard by summer heat. Clara sat beside Eli, wrapped tight in an old canvas coat he kept beneath the seat. She didn't look back. Not once. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, fingers locked together as though they were the only solid thing she trusted. Eli didn't press her with questions. Some silences needed room. They crossed the Arkansas River at a shallow bend where the current thinned over stone. The horses strained against the wagon, hooves slipping before finding purchase. Clara watched the water with distant eyes, like she was measuring time instead of distance. By the time the sun dipped lower, painting the plains in streaks of amber, Eli's ranch rose from the horizon-low house. Red barn, fencing, stretched wide against open Kansas sky. "You're safe here," Eli said once they stopped. He handed her a tin cup of water before anything else. She nodded, but her shoulders stayed tight. That evening, as shadows lengthened and the air cooled, Clara stiffened suddenly. Eli noticed the shift. He checked the sky out of habit. It was near one of the hours she had marked. He didn't mention it. Instead, he handed her a grain sack and nodded toward the stable. "Help me feed the horses. Keep moving. Keep breathing. Break the clock." They worked side by side in fading light. No locked doors. No chains. When the hour passed without interruption, something subtle changed in her stance. Not trust. Not peace. But the smallest fracture in fear. The next morning, Eli rode into Dodge City. The streets were already alive with wagon wheels and boot heels striking dust. He tied off outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside. Tom Callahan sat, leaned back in his chair. Boots resting on his desk, hat tipped low. He lowered it when he saw Eli. "Lock on the outside," Eli said plainly. "Iron ring, chain. 3 marks carved in a post." Tom rubbed his jaw slowly. "You step deep." "I know." Tom leaned forward. "Silas filed a complaint at sunup. Claims you kidnapped his daughter." There it was. Not fists. Paper. "Says men at the Long Branch back him," Tom added carefully. Eli held steady. "Sheriff, she's 18. "In this county," Tom replied, voice measured, "a father still carries weight." Eli understood. Out here, blood often shouted louder than bruises. When he returned to the ranch, Clara stood near the fence, staring toward the road like she expected dust to rise at any moment. It did. Just before sunset, she spoke softly. "He won't stop." A thin line of dust formed in the distance, stretching upward against the pale sky. Eli stepped off the porch and rested a hand on the fence rail. 3 riders. Silas in front, 2 men behind him from town saloon, regulars more familiar with whiskey than work. No badge. They rode hard into the yard. "You got something that belongs to me?" Silas called out. "She ain't a saddle," Eli answered evenly. One of the men spat. "Don't have to turn ugly." Clara stepped onto the porch behind Eli. She didn't hide. Silas noticed. For a flicker of a moment, his control slipped. Not anger, fear of losing it. "You think he'll keep you?" Silas snapped at her. "You think he wants your trouble?" Eli didn't look back. "You filed a complaint? Let's settle it in Dodge." "Settle it now," Silas growled, stepping forward. The shove came fast. Then fists. One hired man tried circling toward the porch. Eli drove his shoulder into Silas, sending them both into the dirt. No gunfire. Just grit and breath and knuckles. Silas fought wild. Eli fought steady. One clean punch split Silas's lip. Another knocked him flat. Clara gripped a fence post and shouted for them to stop strong, clear. Silas lay there, blood at his mouth. "You don't understand?" he muttered. She signed it. Eli stilled. Signed what? Too late. A crack in the story. Silas rose slowly. "You want law? Fine." The riders turned back toward Dodge City. Clara's voice barely carried. "He made me sign something." And now it wasn't just about 3 locked hours. It was about land. Dodge City felt heavier the next morning, as though the heat itself had weight. Word had already traveled ahead of him. Men lingered outside storefronts. Women paused along boardwalks. The air carried that quiet hum a town makes when it senses trouble, dressed in law. Inside the sheriff's office, Silas Whitfield stood stiff-backed, dried blood still dark against his collar. Pride held his posture upright. Clara stood a few feet away, hands steady at her sides. Eli did not speak for her. He simply stood beside her. Sheriff Tom Callahan laid a folded paper across his desk. He smoothed it flat with both palms. A transfer of land. Clara's late mother's parcel along the Arkansas River. Modest acreage, but fertile and well placed. Signed in careful handwriting. Silas cleared his throat. Family matter. Tom cut him off with a look. Locked stall. Sign ring. Chain. His voice stayed calm, but the calm carried weight. That ain't family business. He turned his gaze toward Clara. Did you sign this freely? For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around her. Every eye waited. Clara lifted her chin. No. One word. Clear. No tremor. No tears. Silas opened his mouth to argue, but Tom raised a hand. That's enough. The sheriff leaned back in his chair and studied the paper again. Signed under duress voids a deed pending review. And holding someone against their will crosses a different line. Silas's composure cracked in. She's my daughter. And she's 18, Tom replied evenly. Old enough to speak. Outside, boots shifted against the boardwalk as townsfolk strained to hear through open windows. Tom stood. Silas Whitfield, you're being taken into custody for assault and unlawful confinement while this document is examined. Silas's jaw tightened, but he did not fight. Pride would not allow him to beg in front of Clara. As Tom escorted him toward the cell, Silas glanced back once. Not at Eli, at his daughter. Control slipping from his hands like reins cut loose. By sundown, the story had traveled from saloons to church steps and beyond the county line. Some argued a father had rights. Others whispered about the marks carved into a wooden post. In 1880s Kansas, law and custom often wrestled in the same dust. Clara stood outside the office once it was done, breathing in air that felt different, lighter. Eli joined her on the boardwalk. He spoke strong, he said. She nodded slowly. He counted on me staying quiet. They walked toward the livery stable where Eli's wagon waited. The town no longer felt like a cage, just a place made of wood and choice. As they rode out past the Arkansas River again, the water moved steady over stone, unchanged by the trouble it had witnessed. Clara watched it a long time. I used to count the hours, she said softly. Morning, midday, night. You don't have to anymore. The ranch came into view as the sun lowered, warm light stretching long shadows across open land. This time, when evening approached, Clara did not stiffen. The hour passed. No lock, no chain, just winding grass and horses shifting in their stalls. Fear had ruled her by a clock carved into wood. Now that clock lay behind her. Out here, the law was never perfect. It depended on who stood up when silence felt safer, on whether someone chose steady ground instead of turning away. And sometimes, all it took to break a chain was one word spoken clear. If this story stayed with you, ride with us again on Epic Wild West Stories. There are more tales waiting in the dust about courage, consequence, and the quiet strength it takes to stop counting marks on a post and start stepping into open sky.